Buenas tardes. Welcome to the Instituto Cervantes of New Delhi. It's really a great pleasure to be here today to release the opera Omnia, the English version. We have with us, I would like to thank the Foundation Vivarium in the person of Milena Carrara, the president. She is the one behind this event. And I would also like to salute Dr. Karan Singh. Thank you for being here again with us. It's not your first time here celebrating Raimon Panikkar. I want to salute Felix Machado, Archbishop of the Diocese of Vasai. Thank you for being here with us. It's a great pleasure. And I would like also to say hello to all the speakers, beginning with Ravi Kandamat, Anand Amaladas, Kalacharya, Com Carpentier, and Paulo Barone. Thanks for being all here. Thanks also to the ambassador of Venezuela for being here with us, sharing this time with us. And thank you for being here because we are competing with a cricket match between India and Pakistan. And that has no rival. So all the best for India. Hope we win while we are celebrating Raimon Panikkar here. It is really a very special day today, being here. Thanks also to Pranav Jain from Motilal Banarsidass, who is undertaking this huge project of publishing Panikkar's work in English, in an English edition here. And I say today is a very special day, and even if we are very few people, this is being recorded, and this will remain for all the followers of Panikkar and for all the people over the world to see how the opera Omnia is coming alive in different continents and in different countries of the world. As you may know, Opera Omnia is being published in 4 languages: Catalan, Spanish, Italian, and English. And I think more language will be in the future. But let's just start with these 4 languages, which are all very important for Panikkar. As you know, Panikkar spoke so many languages. He spoke in Catalan, which is my own language, Catalan, Spanish, French, Italian, English, of course, German, and more languages. He knew Hindi, he knew Latin, Greek, Sanskrit. He was a real polyglot. But I think all these languages for him serve one single cause. He spoke many languages, but he used a single universal grammar, which is a grammar of love. And he used all this language to express this. I think he used to say often, that wisdom, existence, and joy are the same thing. We'll say that love, wisdom, and knowledge really are the same thing. I could say a lot of things about Panikkar, but there are more people here who will speak at length. He was a friend of mine. He helped me a lot just in the beginnings when I was preparing the Sanskrit Catalan dictionary. He was for me a big source of inspiration. He wrote also the introduction to that dictionary. And he was always encouraging young people to continue this path of overcoming, I would say, the differences between the West and the East, which he never understood. He never understood as geographical differences, but some differences that were inside a common human being. Panikkar used also to tell me so many times that only dead fish swim with the current, and that only alive fish swim against the current, reminding us that this task of living is also a kind of a struggle, but a pleasant struggle in the stream of life, of swimming against the current and standing there, to better understand this river of life. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure, and I would like, with this introductory work, I would also like to say that Elena Perez Villanueva, the deputy head of mission of the Spanish embassy, the ambassador is not here, was supposed to be here, but we have the visit of the president of the Spanish parliament here. And she had to accompany her to Old Delhi, in a visit to Old Delhi, but she promised to be later with us. So sorry for this absence. unwanted absence. And with these words, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Karan Singh. Thank you very much.
I think I'm asked just to release the book at the stage. I'm speaking later. Do you want to? No. I think no. It says here. Think of what do you want me to do? Teacher me that. No. These mics never work. Can anybody get the mic to work? Hold on. At this stage, my role apparently is only to release the book. So it says, so let's get up and release the book. What the Americans call a photo opportunity.
Thanks very much, Dr. Karan Singh, for releasing the book. Please, now you have the floor. Would you like a few words?
Excellencies, distinguished panelists, we have met after a long time, and the Archbishop, and many friends whom I have known for many years. It is a pleasure to be at this Cervantes Institute, named of course after the great Spanish author Cervantes, and his Don Quixote de la Mancha is famous around the world. Some people say he was the first novelist, because that was the first time a novel was, that's one of the literary things. But we are here really to celebrate the work of one of the most interesting and dynamic philosophers of the 20th century, my good friend Raimon Panikkar. Now, he was a Catholic priest, as you know, before he was expelled in 1962 by the Opus Dei. But he went on nonetheless. In fact, I think he was more active after he was expelled than when he was in the member of the church, because then he was freer to do what he wanted to do. And he was really a truly remarkable man, full of energy, full of humor, full of love, full of compassion. I had many, many memorable conversations with him, and he was really a living interfaith person. His statement, you remember, I left Europe for India as a Christian. I discovered that I was a Hindu. I returned as a Buddhist without ever having ceased to be a Christian. Now this is exactly what we need in the interfaith movement. The Rig Veda has a term, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, the wise call it by many names. So if there is a divine, as most people believe, it cannot be separate divines for every religion. The divinity that is there, the power that is there, must be there common and should be accessible to all. One thing very important in the Indic religions is that we believe that there are multiple paths to the divine. Not that this is a path and you must follow this, otherwise you will be expelled or you will be decapitated or you will be blown up. No. There are many paths to the divine. Every person has a different consciousness, and according to that, they can follow the path that they like. That is the basis of the whole interfaith movement, which, as you know, we have started in 1893 in Chicago, with the first Parliament of the World's Religions, where Swami Vivekananda made a very powerful impact. From then onward, the interfaith movement has been continuing down to the present day. I happen to be in an organization known as the Temple of Understanding, which is one of the many interfaith organizations. So, till we get to this idea that the divine cannot be the sole property of any particular religion. No religion say, no, I only have access to divine, nobody else. That is not acceptable, I'm sorry. It's neither rational nor it is acceptable. How much blood is being shed in the name of God, and everybody looks at his God as very compassionate. I worship Lord Shiva, Karpur Garum Karunavataram, the embodiment of compassion. Lord Jesus mounted the cross out of compassion for humanity. So every religion thinks that his God is very compassionate. But they don't realize that unless you are compassionate to other parts also, you are not really compassionate. You can love your own religion as much as you like. You can do whatever you want. You can write your books, you can do your prayers, you can do your proselytization. But you cannot say that if I can say that for me my religion is the best. But I cannot say that because you do not follow that religion, you can be persecuted or killed or blown up. That I think is the basic point that we have to understand. I mean, even as I speak today, there are wars going on in the world in the name of religion. So it's a great tragedy that the one power that transcends all our differences, that power itself we have divided, or we have tried to divide and try to monopolize. So therefore the Rigvedic dictum, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti, the truth is one, the wise call it by many names, I think is the keynote. And for Raimondo, of course, that is his life. I mean, as he said in this marvelous statement, he left Europe as a Christian. When he came to India, he discovered he was a Hindu. Then he went back a Buddhist, and without once giving up his Christianity. Although the Opus Dei may not have liked that very much. But the fact is that that is the way it was. So he was one of those rare people who cut across all barriers of language, and he's written such a lot. His first book, in fact, was The Unknown Christ of Hinduism. We were talking about that over tea. But I think that his masterpiece really was the Vedic experience, Mantra Manjari, an anthology of the Vedas for modern man. It's a superb anthology. It's University of California Press. I don't know whether it's still in print or not. It should be in print, because that is a very excellent work and a wonderful textbook for everybody who loves it. Hinduism and Christianity is in that sense. So now it's very good that all this work is going to be published. I met him first, I must have met him first way back, I think in 1954, when he came to India as a student in Banaras Hindu University. Because he must have called upon me. I seem to remember that perhaps it was Dr. K.S. Kothari or somebody who introduced me, who brought him to me. And then once we met, we became very good friends. And we kept in touch. He kept visiting India from time to time. His third doctorate, by the way, he had 3 doctorates. Third doctorate was a comparison with 3 of the world's greatest theologians, Thomas Aquinas and Adi Shankaracharya. What a combination. And both of them are commentators on the great texts, and both were great intellectuals. I think probably about the same time, I'm not entirely sure. But Thomas Aquinas, did he at the City of God, or was that somebody else? What is his book? Summa Theologica. Sorry. I was thinking of the other great theologian who wrote a book called Civitas Dei, The City of God. And this was quite an extraordinary thing. He published, how many volumes has he published? I'm so glad that they're being published in India. I'd like to congratulate Pranav Jain and I'm going to get the name right. I know Pranav's name, I know the name of the Murta Banarsi Das, but there's another thing beyond it, not only Murta Banarsi Das, publications. See, there are four pieces now of Motilal Banarsi Das. Each one has they call Motilal Banarsi Das, but they have another name after that. So I know them well enough to be able to be able working with me. And as far as Raimon is concerned, as I said, he was a remarkable figure. I remember coming here when he passed away. There was there a function here? No. There was a function here in this institute itself. And then I came once again for something in IIC. There was a function. This is my third function for him. A great man. We don't believe rest in peace. We don't believe that the soul rests. We believe that the soul goes from birth to birth until it finally reaches its destination. So I never say rest in peace. I use the Sanskrit word swasti va paraya tamasa parastat. May your journey towards the light be auspicious. Whenever I have to remember somebody, I never use rest in peace. We don't believe that the soul rests in peace. So for him I would also, may his journey towards the light be auspicious. I'm sure it will be. Friends, before I close, I just want to make a few general remarks. We live in a time of great tension and great stress, and two terrible wars are on as I speak. Thousands of people are being killed in Israel and in Palestine and in Ukraine and in Russia. What is this? We thought that the wars were over. They were only in the 18th and 19th century when colonial powers were fighting with each other. But no, the poison of exclusivity and hyper-nationalism and religious fanaticism continues. And they result in these sort of terrible conflicts. We in India have gone through this, we remember. I am old enough to see, I'm now 92 by the way. I've seen the birth of India, the partition, and all the terrible things that happened during partition. A million people were dislocated and 100,000 people at least lost their lives. So we've been through that. And that is why our constitution maker said, no, there's going to be no exclusivity. Although the Pakistan was created on the basis of Islam, we said no, we are not going to create it on the basis of Hinduism. We're going to have a secular constitution. And that is why our constitution specifically gives freedom of worship and also gives special attention towards religious minorities. So that is something we're grateful for. And what can we do? What can a philosopher do in an age like this? I think we can do two things. One is we can try and use this period for our own spiritual evolution. Because each one of us, I'm sure, is on a path. Whatever may be the goal of that, end of that path, we've got to proceed on that. We've got to move on that. Because as you said, if you don't move, you're going to be swept down. The currents are against spirituality. So we've got to fight, we've got to move up. And secondly, we've got to do whatever we can to alleviate suffering. So I'm going to suggest that before we get on with this, and I may not be able to stay for very long here, because I have another function, let us sit quietly for 2 minutes and pray. Pray for peace, pray for those who've been so cruelly damaged and killed during this war. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Karan Singh, for these inspiring words. I remember that Panikkar used to say that religion has not the monopoly of spirituality, and you just voice that feeling. And also thanks for these 2 minutes of prayer in these difficult times. And now I would like to give the floor to Father Felix Machado, Archbishop of the Diocese of Pasay, and also has done incredible job in the interreligious dialogue as a president. You have the floor.
Your Excellency, Dr. Karan Singh, respected on the dais, and my dear friends, I would like first of all to express my gratitude, I must say, that Dr. Milena Carrara took this initiative, and my special appreciation for Motilal Banarasidas for undertaking this big project to publish the volumes of Raimon Panikkar. My keen interest in Indological and Indic studies is where first I heard of Raimon Panikkar. But who is he? Dr. Karan Singh has kind of given us a glimpse of who he was and who is for many now through his books, his legacy. Gifted with sharp acumen, ability and readiness to learn. Panikkar, as he said, I have heard, I have read. He had mastered various ancient and modern languages. I believe he did not like to write a book and then have it translated, but he would himself write the same book in different languages. All this, as well as his hard work, brought Panikkar in the world of great thinkers. Some of the books he wrote are monumental in size and have been published in several languages and editions. Besides that, hundreds of his scholarly articles have been published in world-renowned journals on philosophical, theological, social, cultural, religious, scientific, historical and linguistic topics. From 1967 to 1971, he was visiting professor of comparative religion at the Center for the Study of World Religions in Harvard University. And since 1971, he was professor of comparative philosophy and history of religions in the Department of Religious Studies, the University of California, Santa Barbara, where I really came in very close contact, because although I was doing my doctoral studies in New York at Fordham University, I wanted, also because of the encouragement of Raimon, I wanted him to be my guide. And the university thought that they would have to pay a lot of fees for his coming there from Santa Barbara, from California to New York. But that was not to be, because Panikkar as it was said, was man of love. And all he wanted was that the world must more and more seek the light of knowledge. Panikkar also taught and lectured in many universities in Europe, in Asia, for example in Banaras University, and North and South America. It is difficult to introduce him, and Dr. Karan Singh has already told us that famous quote of his. He said, "I am born at the crossroads. A Christian," as he said, who discovered that he was Hindu, later converted to Buddhism without ever having left Christianity. Panikkar elaborates his personal journey in the unknown Christ of Hinduism. There is a footnote, rather long, which tells us exactly what he wanted by that book. He said he wrote that book not that there was Christ unknown to Hindus, but his thesis was the Christ that the Hindus know is unknown to Christians. And that's why the title of the book, The Unknown Christ of Hinduism. Because of a personal problem, and I quote him now, because of a personal problem of conscience, personal here is not indicating myself as a particular individual, he said, but my relationship with the world, I was looking for the most positive way to overcome a tradition, as I described in my journey above, and the solution was not to step out of it as if it were a bullock cart, or to cancel one's membership as if it were a club, but to live in that tradition, that is to pass it on, to continue it, to climb to the top where other peaks are visible, and or to descend to the depths where the throbbing of the world is perceptible. I feel that I owe it to many to explain the continuity of my path in spite of the mutation that has taken place both in me and in our world. I can only be free from a certain type of Christianity or Hinduism, and for that matter from Buddhism and secularism, if I become a better Christian and a better Hindu." Unquote. One must be unarmed of assumptions and presumptions when one wants to engage in dialogue with the other. There is a book that was published in Mumbai by Somaya Publications. The editors were Dr. Kala Acharya, who is here, and our own Milena Karara Pawan. In this book, for example, the sentence I said, which I can elaborate, but due to lack of time I am not going to do that, but it's a wonderful book because it gives kind of the mind of Panikkar, what he wanted, how he wanted to go, and what he wanted to teach. I may also say that Raimon, Panikkar, happens to be the first Catalan, the first Spaniard, the first Indian, and with one recent exception from the Middle East, the first Asian to deliver the prestigious Gifford Lectures in Edinburgh in 1989. They were centennial lectures, and the title of his lectures was Trinity and Atheism, the dwelling of the divine in the contemporary world. These lectures are published in 2010, entitled The Rhythm of Being by Orbis Press, New York. which is dedicated to Scott Eastham, who has often been editing his English. Dr. Eastham has given comprehensive bird's eye view of the major writings of Panikkar, ranging over a span of some 70 years. And the book was called The Three Worlds of Raimon Panikkar, a guided tour, a conference of Dr. Scott. Panikkar, I just give you a few of the kind of a little summary of few of his very groundbreaking thought that he has expressed. I would like to present shortly those books. The groundbreaking and original thought, intra-religious dialogue. Truly groundbreaking. Panikkar's contribution to the comparative study of religion and philosophy can scarcely even be summarized. He sought to bridge the gap between traditional ways of knowing, scientia, and those of modern science. He sought to extend from an in-house discussion among Christians to a genuine dialogue between religions, a dialogical dialogue rather than a dialectical one, which implies the discovery of the other as being who speaks and acts in his own name. That is, an other who is an original source of intellection. For Panikkar, dialogue cannot be constrained by rules of the game laid down from one side or the other. No single religious or cultural tradition exhausts the millennium human experience. Panikkar categorically states that nobody has a monopoly on being human. Panikkar's famous book, as I said, The Intra-Religious Dialogue, which was published by Polish Press, New York, because I was doing my doctoral studies there, and I wanted every book and every article of his to read and to also make use of, so to speak, in the good sense of the word, to propound my thought on Naneshwari, a 13th century mystic in Maharashtra, me being Marathi, Maharashtrian. And so this intra-religious dialogue has been groundbreaking in the field of interfaith dialogue. In this book, Panikkar explains elaborately that when one studies the doctrines of the various religions, it is called interreligious dialogue. But more rarely the dialogue catches hold within the very person and removes his mask of being a religious spokesperson within his own tradition, and that is intra-religious dialogue, which then becomes in itself a religious process. One then seeks the meaning of life in the light of the experiences that have crystallized within the various traditions and which are already more or less assimilated by the concrete person one is dealing with. It takes place in the heart of the human person in search for his own way. A quest for salvific truth. One participates in such a dialogue not only by looking above towards the transcendent reality, towards the original tradition, but also horizontally towards the world of other human beings who themselves have also found paths leading to the realization of human destiny. Intra-religious dialogue hardly makes a sound. It goes on within the depths of the person. It is open and deep. Dialogue with oneself, which is no longer locked in the jail of egotism. It is deep because one does not dialogue exclusively with one's own tradition or with others as others, but with a self which has assimilated in its own way a view of reality which has drawn upon different sources. When the contact with others is superficial, it is easy to show tolerance and even sympathy towards them. But one does not ask oneself the personal question of truth. Too often, a respective attitude hides a contemptuous indifference. So, intra-religious dialogue, by helping us discover the other in ourselves, contributes to the personal realization and mutual fecundation between the traditions of mankind that can no longer live in a state of isolation, separated from each other by walls of mutual mistrust, or in a state of war which is more or less camouflaged by emulation and competition. Even peaceful coexistence is often but one form of political strategy in order to maintain the status quo, preferable undoubtedly to war. So Panikkar, professing his Christian faith, writes, and I quote, "When I shall have discovered the atheist, the Hindu and the Christian in me, when I shall consider my brother as another myself, and when the other will not feel alienated in me, then we shall be closer to the kingdom of God." I have summarized this thought from an article which was published in 1987 in Interculture, a kind of a bilingual English-French magazine from Canada. We need to return to primordial meaning of myth if faith is to make any sense to life. Among Panikkar's innovative cross-cultural studies, one cannot ignore his book Myth, Faith and Hermeneutics, Cross-Cultural Studies, again published by Polish Press in New York. The book brings together the major essays which best illustrate his method of understanding the truth of more than one religious tradition from within. Panikkar writes in his book, and I quote, "If intellectual activity divorces itself from life, it becomes not only barren and alienating, but also harmful and perhaps eventually criminal. Myth is the fundamental area of human experience. A living myth does not allow for interpretation because it needs no intermediary. Myth is that which we have taken for granted, that which we do not question, and it is unquestioned because de facto it is not seen as questionable. The myth is transparent like light. It purifies thought, bypasses thought, so that the unthought may emerge and the intermediary disappear. Faith is understood as that dimension in man, woman, that corresponds to myth. Belief articulates the myth in which we believe without believing that we believe in it. Hermeneutics is that art and science of interpretation, of bringing forth significance, of conveying meaning, of restoring symbols to life, and eventually of letting new symbols emerge. Hermeneutics implies going out from my own stand in order to understand another worldview." Unquote. Another groundbreaking thought that expresses in one word is cosmotheantric vision. Panikkar's original intuition, I would say, among others. Panikkar warns about a danger of our times, namely a hasty and short-circuited synthesis. He suggests that before coming to some sort of holistic view, we must study doctrines, know the facts, and discover the spirit of another tradition. The question he asks is the following: how is one to arrive to a true growth in awareness, to a personal synthesis which spontaneously informs all of one's life and translates in a new way expressive of that synthesis. Panikkar further questions, how from given perspective can one come to understand another viewpoint? Panikkar affirms that the divine, the human and the earthly are the three irreducible dimensions which constitute the real. That is, any reality in as much as it is real. And so, in his book, Cosmotheantric Experience, Emerging Religious Consciousness, edited with introduction by Scott Easton, published by Orbis Books, Panikkar critically comments that modern man tends to forget the vision common to ancient, medieval and Renaissance man, a vision of the entire universe as a living reality in which angels moved the planets, demons stalked to and fro, and spirits of every kind populated the cosmic sphere. Panikkar further continues, modern man increasingly senses that the center is neither a merely transcendent Godhead, nor the cosmos, nor himself. Therefore, it is not enough to treat only symptoms. The change required is radical. Panikkar proposes the need to develop the more integral experience. The cosmotheantric intuition, that is cosmos, theos and anthropos, of Panikkar does not gravitate around a single point, neither God nor man nor world, and in this sense it has no center. The three coexist, they interrelate, and maybe are hierarchically constituted or coordinated, but they cannot be isolated, for this would annihilate them. I come to conclusion. Raimon Panikkar's writings have been published extensively in various languages and spread far and wide throughout the world. I know in India, upon the news of his passing away, we had in Bombay, organized by a Hindu in Mumbai, kind of a meeting not to mourn this great man, but to see how his legacy can more and more spread in India. As Dr. Karan Singh has said, I think I join his voice that India needs this openness that Panikkar had. And he was so proud when he felt that he was among all. He's a Catalan, but Spanish, but he felt Indian also. Obviously, he never kind of stayed attached to one particular place. Raimon Panikkar's writings have been published extensively in various languages and spread far and wide throughout the world. I do not intend to give an exhaustive list of all his writings in such a short paper. I would mention one among them because it has had a deep impact on my own way of being, thinking and acting in this world. The book already mentioned by Dr. Karan Singh, The Vedic Experience, Mantra Manjari. This monumental achievement of Panikkar is important for all who want to study cross-cultural studies. For me as a Christian in India, this volume has become my close companion with the Bible. Panikkar himself declares in his foreword to his opera Omnia that, I quote, "My writings are not the fruit of mere speculation, but rather autobiographical. That is, they were first inspired by a life and praxis that have been only subsequently molded into writings." Unquote. Panikkar reveals that he did not live for the sake of writing, but he wrote to live in a more conscious way so as to help his fellows with thoughts not only from his own mind but also springing from a superior source which may perhaps be called spirit, although he does not claim that his writings are in any way inspired. This is from Mysticism and Spirituality, Part 1. Panikkar wrote a rather long preface to my book, Naneshwari, Path to Liberation, published by Somaya Publications in Mumbai in 1997, which is about a revered and most dear Maharashtrian mystic of the 12th century who lived in where I was also born. So I had a special bond, as it were, and responsibility to make him known across the oceans. It was rather a chapter. The preface Panikkar wrote to my book was like a big chapter, and I would like to conclude with a brief sketch. Panikkar states in his own words, he says in that book, I quote, "Mysticism should not be seen as the special province of the few, but rather as one essential dimension of humankind, although present in a somewhat withered form in today's technological and scientific culture, which approaches human reality through rigorously bifocal lenses, the senses and the ratiocinating reason. In spite of this, of the protests of artists and the passive resistance of ordinary people, mysticism means integral experience of life. It is the holistic experience of reality. Every person has a mystic hidden in him." This is from Opera Omnia, Volume 1, that I have taken. Dear friends, thank you for your attention, and once again I appreciate very much Milena's initiative and Banarsidas, Motilal Banarsidas's undertaking it to publish these volumes. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Machado, for these wonderful words. We almost felt that Panikkar was speaking. Really very. And I think you just say a very interesting thing, that India needs men like Panikkar, especially in these polarizing times all over the world. I wonder how he would have felt, and Dr. Karan Singh about these two terrible wars, and how he would feel today if he was here with us. Anyway, I would like to give now the floor to Milena. She's the president of the Fundación Vivarium, Raimon Panikkar, and editor of Panikkar's Opera Omnia. So please, Milena, you have the floor.
A short 5 minutes video was supposed to be shown to you today because I wanted Panikkar to be here, present with his charismatic smile, but something went wrong. I had difficulties with the subtitle. Anyway, it started with these words. It was an interview to Panikkar, and I am going to read them. Ever since ancient times, the golden thread has symbolized the kind of wisdom that comes from personal experience and is not subject to institutional conditioning. It is a thread because it represents the continuity of experience that is constantly both ancient and new. And it is a fine thread because in each generation it is continued by a minority of individuals. The thread is golden because it is immortal, surviving even during the darkest, most chaotic periods, at times more evident, other times more hidden. I've chosen to begin my speech with these words about the golden thread that unites certain people, as I believe that Raimon Panikkar was one of them. It has been my good fortune and honor to have spent much of the last 20 years of his life by his side, and I can testify to the fact that the deep, rich wisdom that transpires in his opera omnia, of which we released the 6 volumes today, is not born from mere speculation, but is the fruit of his personal experience. As Panikkar himself says, and I'm repeating the sentence just mentioned by Bishop Francis, as Panikkar himself says in the editorial of each volume, he did not live to write, but wrote to live in a more conscious way and to offer his brothers and sisters thoughts that were not merely the fruit of his mind, but flowed from a higher source, perceiving himself as a microcosm that reflects and influences the macrocosm of all reality, as the majority of cultures have sustained when speaking of the body of Shiva, the communion of saints, the mystical body, the karma, and now the golden thread. The thread is what profoundly united 2 friends, Panikkar and Henri Leceau, here in India known as Abhishitananda. 2 personalities with very similar and yet very different aspirations, as clearly emerges in their correspondence, which is published for the first time today by ISPCK in the book The Gift of Friendship. And I took the opportunity also to release this book, as I did with other, beside the opera omnia, which is the richness of Panikkar's thought. I also tried to show Panikkar more from his humanity. So it was published A Pilgrimage to Kailash by Motilal again, and also The Water of the Drop, which is a collection of his diary, as I wanted to show also not Panikkar as an intellectual person, religious, theologian and so on, but his humanity. And now, today, just released now, if you wanted to come here, Ella, just to show you the book. Do you want? Yeah. Okay, because I know opera omnia is important, but also this, I think. Can you please? Okay. Yes, please. Okay. Just for it. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, back to our speech. Panikkar, priest, philosopher, cosmic, beta cosmotheandric, to be faithful to his vision of reality. Optimistic, joyful, and serene, succeeded in harmonizing the various conflicts poles in his life. Abhishitananda, from France, Bretagne, Benedictine monk, who once in India was quickly drawn to the Upanishads and became a sannyasi, while remaining faithful to Christ. He was constantly torn between these two loves, causing him to be anguished, tense, and skeptical. Their correspondence spans 16 and a half years of epistolary relationship, about 160 letters between the two, from 1957 to 1973 when he died. Through their correspondence, we are able to follow the progress of their respective spiritual evolution, the expression of which gradually takes shape as they each approach what the Upanishad refers to as the other shore. Their letters are a testimony of a deep friendship, founded on their mutual longing for the renewal of the Church, for its transformation from an organization to a living organism throbbing with the spirituality, for a new form of monasticism and a way to live, to understand and impart the Christian Advaita. Both felt the need to free themselves from the bonds of the past, while at the same time remaining faithful to them. In their letters, we catch glimpses of their inner struggle and torment. Both felt called by God to live and create a symbiosis between East and West, between Vedanta and Christianity, between Shankara and St. Thomas. As we read in the heartfelt letter that Panikkar wrote posthumously to his friend, that we find also in the book published, of course, in the Opera Omnia, volume 1, the Spirituality, the Path of Life, presented today. I quote Panikkar, speaking to Abhishikananda. Would you admit with me that the acosmicness of monks is only valid if the absolute is acosmic? But an absolute that is not all-embracing is somewhat problematic. What is really important, however, is the total openness to the absolute, the obedience to the spirit, the Shakti, the inebriating awareness of being son of God, or to discover Atman Brahman in himself. For Panikkar, the two poles, dualism, did not disappear, but merged together, coexisting harmoniously, interpenetrating and fecundating each other. The title of the book, The Gift of Friendship, refers to the friendship between Abhishikananda and Panikkar, but also to that existing among all of us, who continue to keep alive not only their memory, but also their teachings, so that the golden thread may not be broken, but continue to inspire the new generation. I'm finishing. Concerning which, I would like to take this opportunity to announce the Raimon Prize Asian edition 2023-2025, aimed at both scholars and university students, and ask you to spread the word. Last year, the first edition, the International Panikkar Prize, concluded last year, with the event held in October in Girona, Spain, for the awarding of prizes to 4 young winners. One from Colombia, Bogota, one was from California, one from Italy, and one from Catalonia, Spain. There were no participants from Asian countries. And I thought, perhaps because so few, very, very few books are available, published many years ago. But now, thanks to Motilal and the publishing house, we can spread Panikkar's thoughts and insights. So it is our hope that the Panikkar thoughts will be disseminated on a larger scale, as they are even more vital in the world today, struggling as it is through a period of great darkness and torn by major social and religious divisions.
Now we'd like to continue our session with Rabbi Connaught. He's a provost from the London School of Wellbeing, and he will speak about Nirvana in Buddhism. So, Rabbi?
I'd like to start with a prayer, so I shall do that standing up. Sadgurubhyo Namah. Om Sahanavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I must first of all thank the organizers, the Instituto Cervantes, Milena in particular, and my friend Combe, Carpentier de Gordon over there, for organizing this wonderful coming together of minds. Thank you. I'd like to mention a particular caveat about my paper. Everything is said in the spirit of dialogue. Since the attitude of dialogue, to use Raimon Panikkar's exact words, implies the wish to learn from the partner rather than to teach or to be victorious, we should like to stress some points that may be useful for a better understanding of wisdom as a whole. For clearly, this wisdom cannot be identified with any particular philosophical system. To quote Shankara, when two things are compared, they are compared only in reference to some particular aspect they have in common. If we fail to seek out such common ground, all dialogue is futile and barren. For no dialogue is possible without a certain communion of minds, of ideas, of aims, or at least of urge. End of quotation. This paper aims to consider nirvana in Buddhism and what this means for universal salvation. Doctrinally, Buddhism replaces the spiritual ideal of the early arhats the noble ones who are assured of enlightenment with that of the Bodhisattva, who seeks nirvana not for himself or herself for that matter, but in order to help others. In the Buddhist classics, the concepts of the Buddha and Bodhisattva seem to blur each other. Life is one, say his devotees, and we live for all. It is therefore noble to work for all rather than for oneself, which is a departure from early Buddhist teachings which originated with the historical Buddha himself, where an aspirant realizes the path, follows the teachings, and becomes an arhat himself or herself and is liberated. There is no trace of him when he dies in the perceived subjective, manifest universes of those who have been, so to speak, left behind. For them, samsara goes on, and they carry on with their lives. When a bodhisattva reaches the 10th bhumi, which means full enlightenment, he also liberates himself from any future which he would otherwise experience. According to developed teachings of Buddhism, contrary to the original, such a one is then able to project his influence from the transcendental condition of freedom into the subjective worlds of the other beings who go on living in manifested samsaric universes, perhaps worshipping them under some name and praying for their assistance, seeking their blessings, which they are supposedly able to give by entering or projecting influence into their perceived worlds. As I said earlier, this paper aims to consider what this nirvana means in Buddhist tradition and its implications for universal salvation, and particularly consider what we know as the Bodhisattva vow or ideal, namely that of deferring salvation until all sentient beings are raised, a parallel strikingly we find in Christian theology as well. This concept of universal salvation is an unequivocal part of the message of Zoroastrianism, arguably the oldest living religion, where it's understood that in the final phase, the ultimate victory will belong to the forces of good, which is understood as universal salvation of all mankind in a redeemed world. Whether through origination from Zoroastrianism or independently, the notion of universal salvation emerges clearly as a concept in Christian thought in the teachings of Origen, who, like Plato, envisages salvation for all souls. He uses the term apocastasis, which is restitution, which represents the final destruction of evil and restoration of all souls to God, including fallen angels and Satan. The notion of universal salvation, therefore, could be regarded as an implicit in the Judeo-Christian Islamic idea of the Last Judgment, had it not been limited by the orthodox dogma of eternal damnation for some. Judaism has been rather vague about the resolution of our alienation from the Lord following the fall, but nonetheless, Psalm 14:7, originally understood as referring to Israel's deliverance, was later interpreted as God bringing his chosen people and also the whole world to their state before the fall, with a new earth and a new heaven. Much as these matters are interpreted in purely material ways now, these days, it seems that all nations and individuals will, in the long run, accept the guidance of Israel. We see it implied in Genesis 28, where God says to Abraham, "Through you and your descendants will be blessed the families of the earth." Christianity envisages a final outcome of the world's history on the Day of Judgment, combined with the expectation of the second coming of Christ. After Origen, Gregory of Nyassa taught final restoration of evil spirits to the blessedness of union with God, so that he may be all in all. And it is indicated in the works of saints, like Julian of Norwich, for example. Then we see it in the Anabaptists, even Protestants and Unitarians clearly adopted it till the 19th century. Even up to the present time, in the Russian Orthodox Church. And in the words of Bishop Hilarion, the Orthodox understanding of hell corresponds roughly to the Catholic notion of purgatory. So it's not a permanent feature. Islam, despite appearing adamant about the idea of everlasting hell, in Surah 56, there are several surahs which echo the idea of the new life in salvation for the people of the left hand, and the idea of infidels is explicitly quashed. Dissenting ideas, of course, find voice in Sufism, which we are all familiar with, but we must admit it has very limited influence, if any, in the mainstream. In archaic Chinese tradition, the idea was that one emerged in the world from the yellow springs of the earth and after a harmonious life returned to them. And so it is in India, the home of thought focused on the destiny of humans and their world, where we find a particularly interesting creation idea of renewal in the Indo-European tradition. Creation, or to put it correctly, manifestation of the world happens when Indra, representing the active principle, pierces with his spear the dragon Vritra, who represents pre-manifestation latency. Indra thereby liberates. Literally the word which is used is munchati, hence moksha and mukti and so on. In later Advaita texts you find the refrain munchati, munchati, munchatyeva and all that, it might be familiar. So Indra liberates the creative forces symbolized as the waters, so that the manifestation of the universe can proceed. The antiquity, this is in the Rig Veda, and I can quote, but the antiquity of this idea is demonstrated by its survival in the Hittite tradition, Tarkunsal in Iliankash, in Greece in Zeus, Typhon, Perseus, Andromeda, Theseus and Ariadne, and in European folklore, and of course the story of St. George and the Dragon. In the Vedic story, Vritra is not killed, with the result that Indra has to fight him again and again. So the fun continues. And there is no suggestion of universal salvation and liberation. Salvation is only individual. No notion of universal salvation is ever there, explicit or implied. Now we come to the main concern of this paper, which is to ponder and possibly unravel the meaning of the great Bodhisattva vow and the questions associated with it. R.F. Johnston summarizes this in English. And I quote, "So long as there remains a single being who has not attained Buddhahood, I vow that I will not become Buddha." The extension of the vow to delivering the last blade of grass, end of quotation, makes it only more emphatic. Can this be a promise of final liberation for all? The Bodhisattva aspiration is to enable, by their teaching, large numbers to work at their individual salvation and reach nirvana. And at the end of their natural lifespan, the teaching Buddhas would pass into parinirvana, as it happens with the historical Gautama, who is reported as passing away at the age of 80. To compensate for the fall of man, path of reintegration has to pass through sacrifice. The ego must suffer transformation in the fire of Shiva, as the Hindu would put it. In the Christian tradition, virtual reintegration into the Adamic state of innocence, in passive mode through baptism and other sacraments. Virtual reintegration in active mode into the Christic state is operated through the Eucharist. Herein is to be seen all the difference separating the sinner that repenteth from the just person that needs no repentance. It is the former that corresponds to the active realization, the bird that has escaped. The innocence represented by passive participation is indubitable, but it is the other that calls forth the greatest joy in heaven. That said, simple appearance considered naive by their more sophisticated neighbors, who might miss the fact that under a childlike piety, a high degree of understanding can lie concealed. Christ's frequent references to receiving his teaching like a little child comes to mind. The intimacy of such a state of mutual involvement goes far beyond what a merely psychological appreciation could do justice to. What can, however, be affirmed with confidence about such an encounter with archetypal reality is that it displays the character of a natural sacrament. A sacrament, to be such, implies the possibility of bringing about objective results in the animic substance of the recipient. It works. Ex opera operato, as the Catholic theology has it. The mark it leaves is ineffaceable. The same holds good for any real religious experience. However fleeting it stays thereafter as latent knowledge, which forgetfulness may obscure but cannot efface. Mindfully cherished, such knowledge acts as a continual reminder of what it feels like to be reintegrated, be it only for a few brief moments. The essential identity of samsara and nirvana, as expounded in the Buddhist sutras, remains as the paradox of paradoxes, the ultimate mystery in the face of which all attempts to specify become reduced to silence. In the history of religious aspiration, the meaning of faith is usually linked to that intuitive awareness of ultimate truths which is beyond the cognizance of the intellect bound. In the words of Marco Pallis, what a spate of verbal subtleties, of ingeniously contrived equivocations, of sophistries of every kind have been expended over the ages with a view to expound this mystery. So I shall not attempt that, to define Buddhahood. But what does the great Bodhisattva vow imply? Early Buddhism is clearly concerned with individual liberation, but by implication it also contains a possibility of individuals training for future Buddhahood. As Bodhisattvas, Buddha himself is reported to make predictions about Maitreya in the future. Gautama Buddha himself is reported later in a canonical work to have started the Bodhisattva training under the Buddha Dipankara, 100,000 world periods and 4 incalculable ages later, of course. He could do so only because he was, as a practicing ascetic, spiritually so advanced that he could then and there have achieved nirvana, a state beyond the realms of suffering and therefore free from samsara. But impressed by the sight of the teaching of Buddha Dipankara, he postpones his individual liberation and vowed to become a Buddha himself, to teach others how to achieve liberation. This was purely an individual decision on his part. Similarly, the future Buddha Maitreya must have gone through a comparable experience and made a conscious decision to embark on the Bodhisattva path. The same goes for all future Buddhas, some of whom surely would rather remain active in the world for the benefit of its suffering beings. This type of Bodhisattva is attested by in the sutras. In the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, chapter 2, which is more famously known as the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha Shakyamuni, elevated into a cosmic personality and preaching at a transcendental level, discloses that he originally revealed 3 parts of yanas, third being the Bodhisattva yana, which we were discussing. The other 2 were the Shravakayana, for his disciples who would follow instruction and be arhats, and the Pratyeka Buddhayana, who may achieve nirvana by solitary aspiring for enlightenment, Bodhi, who may, by their own effort, become singular Buddhas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, who, as a rule, do not teach. The Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, like Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, Mahasta, Mahaprapta, and so on, and others, of course, saved innumerable beings. But the message of the Shakyamuni in the Lotus Sutra seems that each one of them had still to accomplish the Buddhayana at some point in the future before reaching Parinirvana. In early Pali Buddhist literature, the Buddha Gautama is, of course, presented as having taught only the Shravakayana, and talks also of many, in fact about 500 of them, who were Pratyeka Buddhas. However, all this does not indicate that any of the scores of the named and unnamed Bodhisattvas aspired to saving all sentient beings, let alone the universe. Every Arhat, Pratyeka Buddha, and even Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, the deities, although inspired to remain permanently engaged in helping others in samsara, will have to accomplish the Buddhayana and become a teaching Buddha with full powers in one of the innumerable worlds in some future world period. In chapter 15 of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha Shakyamuni gave many of the listeners predictions of their careers. This included the notorious Devadatta, who must by then have been released from hell. had Judas and Devadatta, or Mara and Satan, for that matter, awakened to the ever-present possibility of rejoining their own archetypes, they could have climbed their way out of hell itself. The figure of the Buddha or Christ or Krishna standing there in the midst of all the horrors is a feature of traditional iconography, which is precisely there for the purpose of bringing home this lesson. Buddhism has never made the mistake of attributing eternity to hell. Even in Islam, there is a saying to the effect that at the end of time, the fires of hell will begin to cool, which the Alexandrian school of Christian Gnosis also suggests. Sadly, an increasing scholastic and then Protestant Europe in the medieval days loved to leave people in hell forevermore and gloated over the result. And its after effects are still felt all over the world where Europeans have since been. How is it possible then to save all beings, down to the last sentient being? How is it possible to bring the whole universe into a state of liberation, of blessedness? Is it a practical proposition? Does it lend itself to a philosophical analysis and interpretation, such as this small attempt? We must investigate, examine, judge, before accepting hearsay or doctrines, as Raimon Panikkar did, as what the Buddha advised Paddiya, the Lichava prince, and the Kalamas of Koshala to do. There is, however, in the Vijnanavada school of Buddhism, which gives prominence to the intellect, and developed, of course, here in India, surprise, surprise, that from at least the sort of 3rd century, and it's continued to develop, of course, in Central Asia and China and elsewhere since then, there is the notion of Alaya Vijnana, that is, the world which we experience as individuals is not an independent and eternal reality, but a mere projection of our minds. These often overlap and are intersubjective because of their linkage to the collective consciousness. Alaya Vijnana. To quote René Guénon, the end of the world could only mean the end of an illusion, or many illusions. If we grant this interpretation, which has its own logic within the Buddhist system, can it be regarded as universal salvation? Is it? I think it might be. In a sense, just the good old notion of individual liberation from samsara, resulting in arhatship, so back to square one, expressed with the semantic niceties of new words. Don't we all know by now that the experiences of the world, being subjective, are not quite identical, even though they are shared by many of us? So every individual lives in a slightly different private world, which would of course vanish in liberation. I leave you with these sort of questions, which our friend Raimon Panikkar of course relished in discussing and disseminating, and found his métier in. Thank you.
And if you wanted to know more about Nirvana in Buddhism, you can read volume 5 of the Raimon.
Thanks, Ravi, for this wonderful walk through Nirvana. And I think many Christians always felt that if the sin is finite, why the hell is infinite, no? I think. Anyway, I would like to introduce next speaker, Anand Amaladas, from the Sakti and Nilayan Faculty of Philosophy in Chennai. We'll speak about the Christophany. Maybe you want to make something.
Can I say? Can I add something about Anand Amaladas? He was a close friend of Panikkar, and he has the merit of traducing and publishing many books of Panikkar's in Tamil, so that we are very thankful to him.
Good evening to all. Can you hear me? Thank you so much. I'm Anand Amaldas from Chennai. a Jesuit priest. Next week I will be entering my 80th year birthday. Last year I wrote my academic biography as I completed my 6 years of my Jesuit life. Academic biography is only to thank people who shaped my life. The first chapter is obviously dedicated to Panikkar. Though I did my MA in Sanskrit and PhD in Sanskrit, but it's Panikkar's thought that influenced me, shaped my thinking in dialogue. That's why my task now is to introduce Panikkar to other people. I have translated 6 of his books in Tamil, translated and made known to the Tamil people. It's not enough that scholars read at the universities. Ordinary people should know. The last one was the summary of all 18 volumes. In one volume, Milena publishes Vita e Parola in Italian, which I translated into Tamil and published it. This is one part of my task as a student of Panikkar. The other task is to clarify some of the enigmatic statements of Panikkar, which created some confusion, misunderstanding. One statement is what Dr. Karan Singh and Bishop Machado quoted, namely that he came to India as a Christian, found himself as a Hindu, returned as a Buddhist without losing Christian identity. People think it's a joke. There was a cynical review in Frankfurt Allgemeine, a German paper, when he died, Congress Guru, servant of all religions. But the point is, they have not understood what Panikkar meant by this. Panikkar himself clarifies elsewhere. He says, in all religion there are 3 dimensions. One is sociological dimension. Namely, every religion has a specific code of conduct, specific symbols, specific rituals, etc. In that sense, I cannot be a Christian, Hindu, Muslim at the same time. It's not possible. There is another level, Panikkar calls sacramental level, if you like, Sampradaya, where I go for the marriage festival of my Hindu friend, I take dinner at my Muslim friend for his festival. Without losing my Christian identity, this doesn't come into the picture at all. As a human being relate, some change takes place. That's called sacramental dimension. There's a third dimension, which he calls metaphysical dimension, where I meet Christ or Krishna at that level, but which includes the earlier 2, but does not allow to be manipulated. Unfortunately, we remain at the sociological level. We fight all the time at the sociological level, reducing religion to sociology. That is the explanation of Panikkar for this. He's not saying he's Christian, Hindu, Muslim at the same time or same level. No. He's talking about sacramental level. So that's why certain clarification is needed, and those who have studied Panikkar in detail should explain that. Another provocative statement which creates confusion again, which is necessary for introducing my topic, namely, he says, there is nothing in Christianity which cannot be traced back in Hinduism in some form or other. I repeat again. There is nothing in Christianity which cannot be traced back in Hinduism in some form or other. On the other hand, there is nothing in Hinduism which cannot be interpreted the Christian way. Which might look a bit provocative. That's what he's doing all his life. I'll come to this particular point. And then again says at the end, look, Christianity needs Hinduism, Hinduism needs Christianity. If Hinduism goes in its own traditional way with the caste, etc., it will be irrelevant. The Christians also go in their own way with a conquering attitude, they will be counterproductive. So Christians need Hindus, Hindus need Christians. That is Panikkar's statement. So in that context, I come to the topic now given to me, namely introduce the book Christophany. This Christophany is a theme is already focused in the earlier book, namely Unknown Christ of Hinduism, 1964, which Bishop Machado explained there very much. So there he interprets Badarayana as Brahma Sutra, second Sutra 112, Janmatyasya Yadaga, with his own exegesis from the Christian perspective. The Janmatyasya Yadaga, namely, which means Brahman is that where the origination, sustenance, transformation of this world comes. In a word, Brahman is the total ultimate cause of the world. A Christian interpretation would be that from which this world comes forth and to which it returns and by which it is sustained, and that is Christ. That is John Gospel 12:32. The Christians might remember the Bible. Okay? Now, this is Panikkar's way of going about trying to interpret in his own way that idea of unknown Christ of Christ of Hinduism, insight is further developed in the fullness of man, Christophany, which is being released today, namely 2004. Central to this book is the chapter on the experience of Jesus. It is not the logos that dominates there. What is required is an openness to the phania, namely, Panikkar makes a bold statement that Christology ignores the mysticism of Jesus Christ. Christian traditions have to a large extent neglected this mystical dimension of Jesus Christ. Focused on this message, they have devoted their energies to safeguarding orthodoxy. Doctrines have taken center stage, and mysticism have taken the back seat. Because Christophany aims at experience, Panikkar asks, is Christian faith founded on a historical book or a personal experience? For Panikkar, Jesus came to give life, not to hand over doctrines. I quote Panikkar, page 51 in that book, and the old edition, not this one. The Christ of the Christophany is the Christ that was and is, will be in the whole of creation, that is, in every single being, not only in Jesus. Jesus is Christ, but not Christ cannot be identified completely with Jesus. Hence, other traditions have no need to call him by the word Greek name if you don't like it. You will say Jesus is a Jew. Christ is not a Jew. He makes several statements in different contexts to clarify his point, what he is trying to say that. Similarly, Christophany opens our eyes to ecosophy, listening to the wisdom of the earth, not to absolutizing history, and consequently realizing that the incarnation as a historical event cannot be considered as a universal human fact, and that Christianity too is a cultural construct. And above all, Christophany is a symbol of the mysterium conjunctionis of divine, human and cosmic reality. It is not merely Christology as it is reached as it was taught to us when we are studying theology, which is a fruit of Christian faith in dialogue with Judaism and Greco-Roman world, later with European people, but it's Christophany where the Spirit is at work, crossing borders beyond the rational doctrinal approach. The living Christ is not subordinated to the Logos Christ. The Spirit opens the door to other religions of Asia and Africa, of which the traditional Christology says nothing. It is not mere exegesis of the inspired text, but Christophany penetrates into every manifestation of the human spirit. Panikkar 2004. Now, Christology versus Christophany. I don't want to summarize the whole book, otherwise you won't read the book, but some taste of what is said in the book is good for other people to know that. Namely, another example of Panikkar's cross-cultural thinking in the field of theology. He offers an alternative way of looking at the whole discussion of how one understands Christ from Asian perspective. The unfolding of the mystery of Christ as Christic principle in each person and in the world, as well as in the theological imagination, is a Christophany. This insight has its own origin in the unknown Christ of Hinduism, grows in the several versions of its formulations. Panikkar starts with saying that Christians cannot have the monopoly of Christ. Christ, who is revealed through Jesus to the Christians, is not everything. There are other phases of Christ that are revealed to other religions, which have other names and other faith claims. Panikkar prefers to call it Christophany rather than Christology, which arose overwhelmingly in dialogue with Judaism, with the Greco-Roman world, later with the mentality of the new European people, and dialogue with Islam. About other cultures like that of Asia and Africa, one does not hear anything at all. In other words, Christology is a Western product bound to the history of a culture. But then Panikkar is not excluding the contribution of Christology, but only wants to complement it with his own notion of Christophany. Then he proceeds to outline the task of Christophany and identifies 9 characteristics of this vision against the background of contemporary religious scene, where one notices the decline of the traditional religions, the internal crisis of Christian identity, and the external situation of the world where cultures and religions meet on planetary level. First, Christophany offers an image of Christ that all people are capable of believing in that man who lived seems 20 centuries ago, but still seems to many people to live today. Secondly, Christophany offers epiphany of conditio humana, human condition in the light of our contemporary situation, in the light of what proceeds out of something beyond man, which has accompanied Homo sapiens since his first appearance on earth. Third, Christophany presents a manifestation of Christ to human consciousness which includes both an experience of Christ and a critical reflection on that experience. Fourth, Christophany does not reject the deeper insights of Christology, but builds a continuity with it, which offers a possibilities of discovering the hitherto unexplained new perspectives. Fifth, Christophany suggests that Christ cannot be reduced to a teaching, as the Logos does not make out of the whole Trinity. Instead, Christophany relates to the Spirit which differentiates itself from the Logos, but not separated nor subordinated to Logos Christ. The Son of Man is neither comprehensible nor real without the Spirit that gives him life. The Spirit is irreducible to either a rational intelligibility or a feeling subordinate to reason. The Phania means a direct appearance to human consciousness, though every perception is not credible without further verification from all other human faculties. Sixth, Christophany emphasizes a disposition of the spirit, contemplative attitude, that is more passive or feminine in receiving Christ's impact on the human consciousness, in contrast to more aggressive inquiry on the part of reason. 7. This notion of Christ includes the figure of the historical past and reality of the present. Christophany is not mere exegesis of the inspired text, nor Christian archaeology. Separation of philosophy and theology is not accepted. Christophany is open to both dialogue with other religions and an interpretation of the same tradition on the basis of a scenario that embraces the past as well as the present, including the secular. Christophany penetrates into every manifestation of the human spirit and is constitutively open to the dialogue with the development of modern natural sciences. 8. Since this approach is open to dialogue and aims at integrating in a wider, broader cosmovision, it cannot remain limited to the past event alone. Christophany interrogates other cultures as they in turn interrogate it. The other religions are no longer treated as adversaries as they used to do in the Christology classes, but are acknowledged in terms of their own self-understanding. 9th, this last point, Christophany understands other religions of the world as proper and legitimate places for theological activity. Thus, it dares to widen this concept of theology as God talk, which we ourselves can discover in every authentic expression. In a word, as Panikkar sums up, Christophany projects us into the fabric light or the taboric light in Mount Tabor that allows us to discover our infinite dimension and presence the divine in the same light that allows us to discover God in his human dimension. I thank Dr. Milena for taking the initiative and Motilal bringing out this volume and our director of Cervantes Center for organizing this wonderful meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Professor Das, for this wonderful talk.
I think Panikkar was really a vipera, I would say, in the Vedic sense, an inspired person, a person who used to be brave, because that's the meaning of vipera. And I think your words tell us a lot about this Christophany, which I think he really embodied. Well, I'm sure there are many questions, but I think we don't have time for questions. We let the speakers, to float us with their knowledge and feel the presence of Panikkar all through. So now is the time for the Executive President and Director of Sanskriti Sambhardhan and Sanshodhan, Pratishthan, in Mumbai. And she will speak about duality and oneness and Panikkar's concept of cosmotheandric experience. It's a great pleasure to have you here again, Ms. Kalacharya, and we're looking forward to hearing.
Archbishop Felix Machado, Oscar Puje, Milena Carrara, and others on the dais. My topic is duality and non-duality of Nimbarkacharya and cosmotheandric notion of Raimon Panikkar. Nimbarka is the promulgator of the Veda, Advaita, duality and non-duality offshoot of the Vedanta system. He is placed in 1162 AD. That is the 12th century, we can say. The Vaishnavas of South India include two types of teachers, Arvas and Acharyas. These teachers, belonging to the 11th century or 12th century, disapproved the doctrine of Maya, unreality of the world, and were infused with the doctrine of Bhakti. Nimbarka advocated the theory of duality and non-duality to explain the relationship between Brahman, Jiva, and Jagat. His commentary on the Brahma Sutra is known as the Vedanta Parijata Sagra. His Dashashloki is the purport of his philosophy. Unlike Ramanujacharya, he didn't accept the doctrine of Maya and he thought that the world is real. Like that only, following him, Nimbarkacharya also accepts three categories: Brahma, Jiva, that is the individual soul, and Jagat, the world, the last two being dependent on the first. Jagat, according to Nimbarkacharya, is divided into three categories: Prakruta, that is derived from the matter, Prakruti; Aprakruta, that is divine; and Kala, that is time. The Aprakruta Jagat includes, in addition to the divine abodes of Lord Krishna, his body, hands, feet, as well as his surroundings. According to Nimbarka, Kala is a separate type of Jagat. It regulates all the evolutions of the world. Jagat is an attribute, Guna. Brahman is the entity possessing the attributes Guna. The attribute is both identical with and different from the entity possessing the attribute. Anticipating the objection, how the Lord is sentient and is of the nature of eternal bliss, can have the insentient word as his attribute. The insentient word, due to its impurities, can soil the blissful nature of the Lord or the Brahman. Nimbarka points out that Brahman or the Lord is not affected by the quality of Jagat. He is like the magician who is not affected by his magic, or like the spider that is not affected by the web that it creates out of its own cell. The cosmotheandric formulation about the interdependence and the threefold structure of reality, initiated by Professor Panikkar, comes close to Nimbarka's philosophy of Veda or Dvaita, duality and non-duality. Amongst the new terms Panikkar has coined, cosmotheandric is the most distinctive one. It refers to the theos, the anthropos, and the cosmos as the three constitutive dimensions of reality, different but inseparable. The term stands for the union of the human and the divine in Jesus Christ. Panikkar felt that the term theandrocosmic would have been more accurate than the term cosmotheandric. However, he opted for the latter as the former term would not sound euphonic. It is quite apparent that the order andros, theos, that is the ancient Greek word which means God, and cosmos is eminently reasonable and sensible. Word andros indicates strength and courage. As Dr. Radhakrishnan has pointed out, that in Hinduism, I quote, the same word expresses itself at one stage as power, at another as personality, at a third as all-comprehensive spirit, just as the same forces which put forth the green leaves and also cause the crimson flowers to grow. We do not say that the crimson flowers are all the which points out to mutually interdependent conditionality. Since it is relative, it cannot be called absolutely real. It is subject to extinction. Since it occurs, it cannot be called absolutely unreal. Thus, all phenomena are neither reality nor nothingness. On these lines, in Christianity, the cosmocentric intuition means that the divine and the human do not exist without each other. The cosmocentric principle would be stated by saying that the divine, the human, and the earthly are the three irreducible dimensions which constitute the real, that is, any reality, in as much as it is real. This was mentioned by Archbishop. Divine, cosmic and human. The three worlds are distinct, but they are not separated. The human, the cosmic and the divine are neither dialectically opposed nor existentially severed, because they are not three, but one reality, says Raimon. The cosmocentric reality is free from dichotomies between matter and spirit, thinker and thought, creation and creator, etc. It is at once one and many. There is no God without man and world. There is no man without God and the world. There is no world without God and man. This understanding is quite distinct from the rigid separation between spiritual space as inner one and material space as outer, or between God above and world below. Our space is not without the other. In the inner, we discover the outer. Man is more than an individual. It is a person, and not in a net of relationship. Man as a person is to be thought in a larger community. He is a person not only because he has got consciousness, but also because he has the sky above, the earth below, and the fellow humans around. The cosmic dimension allows space to the other two. Verily, what this earth is, that verily is what the body in man here is. For on it, these vital breaths are established. They do not go beyond it. As the Chandogya Upanishad says, the world is part of us. It is our bigger body, not something outside, but a dimension in which we participate. Panikkar elaborates on the anthropocosmic understanding in steps. The first step is to know Ekam, the one that exists before any beginning, that which comes to be, that which is symbolized as the cosmic pillar. Ananda Maldas ji has quoted the Sutra, Brahma Sutra Janmadhyasya Yataha Yato va imani bhutani jayante yena jatani giyanti yam prayanti abhisamishanti tad vijidnyasasva tad Brahma. So, the ultimate reality, Brahman or Atman, can be discovered and pursued, but it can be pursued with continued efforts. Because it has been said in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, for just as butter is not produced automatically by milk or cream, but by a definite effort on the part of someone, so also the Atman has to be gained from the individual self by effort, truthfulness and fervor. The search for the ultimate reality leads us to the great declaration, Mahavakya, consciousness is Brahman, Prajnanam Brahma. Everything is ultimately rooted in consciousness. All forms of knowing are different names for consciousness which is self-illumined. That's why Karan Singh ji had mentioned that Ekam Sadvipraha Bodha Vadanti, because that verse in Veda says Indram, Yamam, Agni, Matarishwana, all these names are there, and then it says Ekam Sadvipraha Bodha Vadanti. Agni, Yamam, Matarishwana, Mahu, etc. So these are the different names for consciousness which is self-illumined and without support. Brahman, the ground of everything. The imperishable is subtle center of existence. power to assume multiplicity without harming unity. Thus, duality and non-duality of Nimbarkacharya and cosmotheandric notion of Raimon Panikkar open for us a vista of evolution of religion, widened circle of philosophy, and a new outlet for inter-religious dialogue. It also inspires us to look beyond ourselves, to see man as a community to change our behavioral patterns in a modern society. So, this is the grammar of love, as you have said. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. One or two quotations I did not say in quotes, but they were quotations, and you can just know by the wording of the passages. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kalacharian, for this wonderful talk. Time is running. We'd like to introduce next speaker, Carpentier, a very old friend of Cervantes, and a real philosopher because he's peripatetic, touring the world. Thanks for being here and bringing us Panikkar near to us. So, Tom, you have the floor.
And he's also a member of the Vivarium.
I hope you can hear me. Your Grace, Bishop, Your Excellency, Bishop Dr. Oscar Pujol, Dr. Kalacharya, Dr. Paolo Baroni, and friends and other speakers in the audience. I would first say that the title I was imparted is really about transculturality and interreligious understanding. And given the short time I want to spend on this, I will try to be very synthetic, but I would first like to note, one, how timely this event is. We are living very dramatic times, and today itself there is that eclipse somewhere in the world which is supposed to generate the ring of fire that is the omen of many momentous events. But also I would like to say that one of the most interesting aspects of the evolution of religions today takes place within the Catholic Church, where we know that there is a great deal of debate, as the Bishop will acknowledge, about the doctrine as opposed, or at least as compared to the tradition, the transmission. Some of you may know that following the statements made and even some of the writings of Pope Francis, the Holy Father, 5 cardinals have expressed what is called in Catholic theology dubia, doubts about his interpretation of the scriptures, formulating the view that he is not going by the Church Fathers, but rather by some more personal readings of what he thinks is needed and what the world reality dictates. So it would have been, of course, fascinating to have Panikkar amongst us giving his own view on this. As you know, he was very much a witness and also an actor in the debate that took place about Vatican II, 1962. You know, when the Church made some radical changes in its, I would say, in the whole, yes, the doctrine, but particularly in the ritual, in the very sacrament of the Mass. And this generated a lot of opposition within the Church, which has not died out, but which in fact is becoming more active now, as we can see from the proliferation of conservative churches, inspired, for example, by the St. Pius X Mass, and also by the Mass of St. Pius V, and also by the pre-conciliar interpretation of Catholicism. So, of course, Panikkar being I would call him an esotericist, but also a traditionalist in the true sense of the term, would, I think, and had a rather ambiguous or rather a conflicted attitude, because he realized the need for, as he often said, for change, for progress, for openness. But he also realized that there are certain intangible aspects of charisma which are not to be tampered with, even though they may be inspired by a living spirit. And this is what he always says about the faith, which is not just the reception of a transmission. And here, interestingly, he quotes the Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa, in which he did a lot of study, and this is rare among Western scholars of Hinduism, because most of them will go for Vedanta or yoga. But what he found, of course, was a definition of truth and knowledge in Mimamsa, which he thought was universally relevant. Because what Mimamsa tells you is that the Veda is truth. And it gives a lot of explanations as to why the Veda is truth. However, it is truth because the Veda, the Mimamsa says, there is always something which at some point cannot be rationalized. In other words, you cannot prove either for or against something. And this is, of course, in a way, a theological rendition of Gödel's proof, which is that every logical, rational representation is, in fact, resting on something which you cannot dispute. In other words, reason has to stop at a certain point. And that is why in Panikkar's analysis of contemporary philosophy, or philosophy in the West from the days of Descartes, he says that philosophy does not fulfill its original purpose of the word philosophy. And that's why either we have to admit that Indian philosophies are not philosophies according to the Western modern view, or that Western philosophy is not true philosophy, and then true philosophy is Indian philosophy, or if you want more broadly, Eastern philosophy, and also Christian theology, insofar as it is not dogmatic theology, but as it is what we might call mystical theology. Now, this leads us to the very interesting consideration that he expressed, that essentially to understand their own doctrine, insofar as it can be understood, Christians need the Hindu analysis of words, and Panikkar was a master of etymology, and semantics as well. He always looked for the original meaning of words. And what I'd like to do is give in no obvious order 7 points which I thought are very interesting to explore for those who want to get an initial familiarization with Panikkar. First, there was a notion, of course, of inter and intra-religious dialogue which was evoked, but the fact that it should take place not just at the superficial level of saying we are all the same and we all like each other, because that's done a lot and it doesn't have a great deal of effect in the social-political realities. On the contrary, we should rise to the metaphysical level, to the cosmic level or cosmotheandric level, and that is where he situates the real work of investigation which leads to a real meeting. So transculturality is also transcendence, and that's very important because we are too attached to formal expressions of friendship or tolerance, but they do not go to the core of the matter. The second thing that he spent a lot of time on was defining hermeneutics, and he said hermeneutics again leads to a point where it's not applicable to faith, and real hermeneutics, which is the hermeneutics of faith, is a hermeneutics which hermeneutics knows not. In other words, the definition of knowledge, the analysis of knowledge cannot go beyond a point. And that is why a rational investigation of reality is an interesting exercise, but it doesn't lead us to where philosophy should. Another point that can be brought out is his analysis of the revelation and also of conversion. Revelation, many historians of religion oppose the revealed religions to the non-revealed religions, and the three great revealed religions are said to be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. However, it's true that if you go beyond that rather superficial description, you realize that all religions entail a part of revelation. I mean, there is very clearly a revelation in the Vedas. In fact, it's very much revelations by the rishis, the Sapta rishis in particular, 6 rishis. And there is revelation at every stage, because you can say that even though in an analytical framework, Shankaracharya, Shankaracharya, and Sri Ramanujacharya, and so many others did indeed reveal aspects of the reality, of the ultimate reality. But as Panikkar likes to put it, what we call revelation is not just a rational discovery of something, but it is rather the fact that reality becomes flesh. You know, as the Christian theology puts it, the truth or the logos became flesh. That is St. John, and that is, of course, the Christ, Christos, about whom some of the previous speakers have talked, as referring to a metaphysical principle, which is by definition universal. So there we see the realization of the promise of the faith into the revelation of reality. And here, of course, conversion is a very controversial theme, because it has been used to basically bring people into a particular religious family with a set of dogmas, obligations, practices, and also to promise in a way not to partake of any other religious community. And yet, if you look at the original conversio means to turn around, to turn back, which means to turn to God, to turn inwards, to turn from outer materiality. So that in itself tells us that conversion cannot be a politico-social exercise. And that is where the very concept of conversion needs to be properly reinterpreted. And as we know, this is one of the great causes of dissent and conflict in today's world. Then there is the notion of the inheritance, and that's legacy, that's tradition, transmission. And Panikkar points out very rightly that in the corpus of the various Indian texts, including the Brahmanas, there is no such thing as a inheritance in the sense of receiving a material legacy. It's more of becoming the person who is giving to you his own self. And therefore, you become him. That is the right of death and succession in the Hindu tradition. And likewise, Panikkar likes to say that, you don't inherit from your father, you inherit your father or your mother. So as a matter of fact, this transmission, inheritance, is becoming the other person, but not taking claim of that property. So that's why when you say we are inheritors of a tradition, whether it be Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, or other, you cannot say that this is our property, and to share in it, you must be either part of us or you must contribute to it in a material way. On the contrary, what happens is that you have inherited, you have had a succession that was entrusted to you. It is sacramental, and your duty is to maintain its original spirit and turn to the East. That's what he calls reorientation. All religions are looking to the East, but as he said, the East can never be reached. The East is always beyond us. However, turning to the East means creating the communion between all the faith, really. Then, of course, some of his very interesting references to the Indian social order. Because here, the Indian social order is under a lot of criticism. And in fact, it has been used as a reason to discredit Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, the Varnashrama Dharma. We are hearing a lot of that today from various quarters. However, Panikkar went far beyond that, because he understood the metaphysical reason, the metaphysical roots for the Varnashrama Dharma. And the problem is that metaphysical principles, when they are applied in a systematic sociological context, can become abusive and can become corrupt. And that is what has happened in India as in many other societies. However, there is indeed everywhere in the world an objective reality, which is that there are Varnas and there are Jatis, which doesn't mean they are excluding each other, which doesn't mean that they despise each other. It simply means that there are different orders of humanity, and these different orders concur to the common whole, the common body, which is exactly the meaning of the Purusha Sutta, him. It's not about people being born in a particular social category, although objectively this happens and no society has been able to eradicate that, not even the communist societies. But this being said, it is all a matter of the organic unity and diversity of the body. And then, of course, not wanting to prolong this too much, I would also like to refer to his definition of the four orders of creation, the four orders of reality, really, which are, basically you find that in the Mundukya Upanishad, you have the material order, which is Vaishvanara, then you have the ideal or intellectual order, which is Taijasa, and then you have what he called the spiritual order, which is Prajna, and then finally you have Turiya, the fourth, which is undefinable. And that in itself tells you that the entire physical manifested world is but a mirror image, an expression, an articulation of a completely supernatural, super physical order, Turiya, which the physicist David Bohm called the implicate order, whereas the three others, material, intellectual, and mental or spiritual, belong to the lower explicate order, the one what we are all living in our bodies. So essentially what you are dealing with here is a recognition of the ancient metaphysics and the ancient anthropology of India in the terms of contemporary physics and biology, which Panikkar was following rather closely in his days, but which have made enormous progress in the last 20 years and which unfortunately he could not actually witness. But his commitment to a dialogue with science shows its relevance ever more. And it shows his enormous prescience because of the way in which he was able to create a common platform for religious and spiritual traditions to understand each other and to keep their sociological separateness. Because let's face it, the great fear of religion is to lose their followers, to disappear. Therefore, the organizations protect themselves by either trying to keep others away or by, on the contrary, trying to convert them so that they make them stronger. And of course, Panikkar saw that this is an inevitable biological process. Life is struggle after all, and life is also, autophagia. I mean, there is a process of eating oneself by eating others. Yet, keeping the metaphysical dimension free from that and recognizing it is the place where people can really come together. And this is where, of course, Panikkar gave us a unique lesson because he was one of the first, along with very few like Annie Besant and Ananda Kumaraswamy, who strive to understand Hinduism in its own terms. As he said it, the golden rule of hermeneutics is that a religion or a tradition should understand itself and recognize itself in the description you make of it. Otherwise, you are just giving a caricature. And in that sense, by defining the parameters of Hinduism in its own terms and telling the Hindus, do not try to be apologetic. And apologetics is a discipline of Christian theology which he did not like. He said, it's a habit of saying, well, we have to show you we are the best because this is what we did and this is what our Savior did, and therefore there is nothing like that with you. He said that's sort of the wrong kind of exercise. Hinduism should remain rooted in its tradition and should look at the East. It should reorient itself. It shouldn't become an apologetic exercise to say, well, actually, we are almost like the Christians, but you know what, we didn't understand our own discipline. It is more of an exercise of self-understanding, which simply projects itself like the light. The light doesn't need to justify itself. The light just shines. So I think these are the few things that I would like to say in this short time imparted. And I'm, of course, very glad that the books are being released in Indian, in English, and available for an Indian readership. And also, I hope that the Panikkar, prize will awake a lot of vocations in the academic and student body, and that more and more people will be working creatively in understanding and interpreting his thought. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Com, for this insightful talk. Really a lot of questions there too. I would like to welcome Elena Perez Villanueva. She's a deputy head of mission of the Spanish embassy, as we said at the beginning. And she was busy with our president from the Congress, but we'll be, you have time still? So I give the word to the last speaker and then I will call you. Thank you. Good. So now for our next speaker, Paulo Barone, from the Paris University in France, and he's also a traveler to Benares and a philosopher, knowing very well the Indian milieu and the Western one. And he will speak about one of the titles of the volumes, Myth, Symbol and Ritual. So Paulo, you have that.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you to everybody. Now, the three words which give the title to the volume are three key words in the Panikkar's thought. These are, at the end, three obsolete words, but they dwell in the field of Panikkar, neither for an antiquarian taste nor for an academic or a merely philological purpose. On the contrary, if they appear here, it's because they play a crucial role in the time in which we live, to better focus our present. Precisely our present, the era which is called modernity, declares the uselessness of this notion and their obsolescence. The mine evidently is not an attempt to summarize the volume, not even to explain the meaning of these three key words, two tasks impossible to accomplish, but only to find a thread through them. What I'm going to do is show how Panikkar rehabilitates these words in three similar but different ways. And the purpose is always the same. This is the reason why Panikkar could not be considered an intellectual, a philosopher, and a theologian, but a researcher. Because his question is always the same. The present, how to live better, fully in it, how to transform our relationship with it without crediting its current, usual, alienating mechanism. As we know, for the perspective of Panikkar, the present situation would be located in the humanistic and economic moment of the life of consciousness. Our present is characterized by the progressive expansion of the discriminative and individualizing powers of the mind, and it would happen after the primordial and ecumenical moment, which is governed, as is well known, by the ecstatic, pre-reflexive dimension of the consciousness, and a certain innocent indistinction between nature, the human, and the divine. Gaining in self-awareness, the second moment destroys that primordial sense of association and swallows its own center of gravity. Each aspect of reality thus gains form only insofar as it reflects the inquiring subject. And the more the subject's inquiring gaze sharpens, the more it diversifies and decomposes the known things, included the subject himself. The mentality of this second moment begins when, not by chance, the meaning of the sacred actions is internalized and the decisive act becomes the act of the mind. The trend which sustains the movement of the autonomy and emancipation of our reason seems to be unstoppable. If the roots of this our current condition are mythic, symbolic and ritual, the movement in which we are is a constant uprooting, a constant distancing from something considered past, already dead. With respect to this trend of so-called emancipation, the possible presence of the myth, symbols and ritual means an anachronism, an archaic survival, typical features of the primitive world. Therefore, a stage that must be overcome, eradicated on the way of civilization. But if it were true, this representation of the modernity would imply a complete fracture, a radical division between past and present, and in general, a dualistic vision. Not by chance, Panikkar, although he recognizes the destructive potential of modernity, doesn't share its demonization. In a spiritual vision, there cannot be a definitive state of aberration and disequilibrium without the possibility to re-include it in a more stable condition of harmony. And in fact, the time which passes in its positivity and reality, that is, the secularity, is sacred. And since the passing of time is sacred, since it asks to be taken in consideration as a last and not a negotiable element of reality, then Panikkar is allowed to say we cannot take refuge in the deserts, the monasteries, or even within ourselves. From this point of view, some modern criticism are right. Their destruction could also be a process of purification. The continuity prevails on the discontinuity, as Guénon too says, given that all that exists in a way or in another, including the error, possesses its own raison d'être, the disorder too has to find at the end its place among the elements of the universal order. Therefore, Panikkar says, the world is saved and yet it is in ruins. This senseless era, the time in which we live, has to have a sense. The question is, which one? The first Panikkar answer is that the image of a contemporary world is not only composed by discursive rationality. The Logos doesn't have the last word. Its autonomy is not so absolute as it assumes to be. Reality does not only correspond to what can and may be said or thought. It includes a part that is not transparent to thought. Even the Logos has its own myth, what we believe in without we don't even realize to believe in, as Machado Bishop quoted before me. What the Logos takes for granted, the place where it stops asking, the place of innocence. Myth, symbol, rituals are spontaneous, original, irreducible ways of revealing oneself of reality. They express the fact of living, the erlebinis, the vivencia, as Ortega y Gasset used to translate this phenomenology term, erlebinis, something that does not coincide with the thinking. They cannot be enlightened. They have a form of consciousness which remains on the background of the reflexive consciousness of Logos, as unsaid, unspoken, as conditions of possibility of the rational speaking. Myth and Logos, they are different but compatible. They can find harmony. Here, the new innocence of Panikkar seems to be a mediation between the two degrees or two forms of consciousness. The power of Logos characterizes the modern era, therefore more or less all the globe. Notwithstanding, at the heart of this mentality there is a difference between not only the present and the past, but also the West and the East. The assumption of fundamental Western intuition, according to Panikkar, is that the polarity of reality is constituted by thinking and being, and that in this polarity, thinking prevails and has the supremacy. Thought tells us what being is. The thought deciphers, reveals, demonstrates the being. Thought takes for granted that being is intelligible, rational. The human being is a rational animal, quoting the well-known Aristotelian statement. That is, it is only the thought that makes us human being. According to another, on the contrary, another paradigm, the most original Hindu or Indic paradigm, is not thinking that lies at the same level of being. The word is closer to it. In the beginning was the word and not the thought. Here the being is allowed to speak, to be spontaneously diffused, to express itself, to lose and empty itself. Once the being speaks, it can no longer be captured, conceived. Freedom, not intelligibility, is here the main category. Being speaks, and what it utters may not be understood. Beings as no laws. It may be expressed in an intelligible way, of course, but this intelligibility works just for us and remains in the outskirts of being, so to speak. It does not penetrate the ultimate reality. Brahman is not self-intelligible. Ishvara is the consciousness of Brahman. I am quoting Panikkar, of course. Being remains untouched, not theoretically transparent, with its most part which goes lost without a second chance, therefore elusive and fleeting, incomprehensible. Here the new innocence seems to rehabilitate some nirguna traits of Brahman and seems to promote the Indic paradigm. In any case, it is impossible to imagine a smooth transition from the Greek model to the later, or worse, a synthesis of the two. There is in any case, and I'm going to conclude, I know, forgive me to be the last. There is in any case a third way to intend the relevance of myth, symbol and ritual, or the Hindu paradigm in the new innocent. The deep and apparently irreversible crisis of the Greek paradigm, the standstill of the rational and reflexive approach, the lack of perspective of the dominant modern forma mentis. According to another variant of the karyological sequence of the human consciousness, Panikkar describes the first one as a moment where the myth and the tradition are in general the past predominate. The second moment, the moment in which we live, on the contrary, is characterized by the invention of writing. Here the history predominates. Progress is a sacred word. The good is in the future. But now, the third moment begins with the splitting of the atom. When man splits the atom, the seemingly indestructible elements on which the entire world rested, I'm quoting Panikkar, show their vulnerability. The human technological miracle has split itself. The atoms of all sorts, spiritual and intellectual as well, are no longer indestructible. The past is broken and the future collapses. The present is the only time left. And this is this experience that opens the door to the predominance of the mystical. Here, in these third possibilities, the transition to the third moment passes through a catastrophe, an interruption, a runaround, a sudden disintegration, and the present is a kind of small, short suspension of time. The historical and rational consciousness exerts such a strong and profound pressure on the nature, on the living forms, on the lineaments of the world, that she pushes the things to the limit of their possibilities. This consciousness brings the ordinary forms of things to an explosion of their thousands infinitesimal details, that is, as if the presence of things and of course also the hours, stops for a moment, and at the same moment it disappears, vanishes. So our present seems to show up itself as a puff of smoke, as a cloud of dust, disintegrated like a bomb with its 100,000 splinters. The Ich et Nunc of tempiternity would then be the redeemed, mystical version of this present. A present, a moment as unique event, and as einmaligemal, as not repeatable time, like the time where past and future are concentrated, like our life, now full of hope, even that, as Panikkar used to say, hope is not for the future, but for the invisible. And as Panikkar says, genuine worship is never repeated. It is recreated. Life is not based on the repetition of the past, with projection to the future, but on the tempiternity of the genuine moments of existence, which are those that, like sacrifice, are consumed as they come to pass, consumed the moment they are performed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paulo, for this interesting talk. The 3 moments, so interesting. I would like now to call the Deputy Head of Mission from the Spanish Embassy, Elena Pérez Villanueva. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Cervantes for the invitation and the organization. Thank you to the Fundación and to Milena for the book and for all. I know there has been many other very interesting interventions. I would like to apologize in the first place for being so late, but as Oscar mentioned, and in the absence of the ambassador, who would have been very happy to be here, we had the visit of the Speaker of the Spanish Congress and the Vice President of the Senate, so we had to do a few things today, and I was just free now. But I am very happy that I made it on time at least to be here. The ambassador that some of you may know is a writer and a great reader, and I remember when Oscar told him that this event was being organized and the books were being launched and the award was being launched, he was very happy that this was going to take place here. So in his name and in the name of all the whole embassy, I would like to maybe not welcome you because you have been here for a while, but to thank you for organizing this and for being here today. I will be brief because I know you have been talking about this for a long time, and I'm sure all these researchers and wise people know a lot more about Mr. Panikkar than me, but I would like to just mention why the embassy is very happy to be part of this event. We, as the Embassy of Spain in India, we are working always, well, in every country, but I think here it's even more, I don't know if it's more important, but it's more present every day. We always try to work to get, of course, a better relationship with the country where we are, and in India we're always trying to find those little or big things that unite us. You may know that for Spain, India is a bit far away. This is not the far east, but it's, I think, mentally it's a bit far away. Spain doesn't really know or has some ideas about India that do not always correspond to what is really happening today. So we try to also help Spain know a little bit more about India. And the same, I think, can happen also in India, that Indians know some things about Spain. Music, traditions, food, but not all the things that Spain has now in modern times, and other things that are not as modern, because as Panikkar's thought is, it has been developed over many years, of course, and so we try to make these things that unite us present. And Raimon Panikkar embodies because of his personal circumstances. The union, of course, of the two countries, of Spain and India, more broadly of what we have usually called East and West, and especially I think he embodies a lot of values that we as Spanish Embassy nowadays want to promote, because these are the values that we think are important for us in Spain, that they can also be very well understood in India. In general, in our work, we try to help get India and Spain closer, like I was saying. So we're working in things that are less, how can I say, that are more material, like of course commercial relations. We are working in visas to make traveling from India to Spain easier. And we work a lot in culture, because we think culture is one thing that really helps unite countries and that really gets people close. So we've developed a very important, I think, cultural program in the last few years since the ambassador arrived and then the new team. I have been here for 1 year, a bit more than a year. The ambassador has been here for 2 years. And our aim is to develop this cultural program, and for that we have, of course, the staff of the embassy, but we are lucky to have the Instituto Cervantes, which is the most successful one in the world in terms of students. It has the highest number of students and of hours, so we are very happy that Spain has this super powerful tool here to promote Spanish language and to promote culture, cultural events like this one. I think it's particularly important these days, unfortunately, to promote the thoughts and the writings and the actions, because I think Panikkar lived the way he wrote. No, it was not do as I say, but really do as I do. He really lived the way he thought life should be lived. And he was supporting dialogue between cultures, between countries, between religions, equality among everyone. And I think that is something particularly important these days with all the events that we have seen in the last few days. But those are in the news, what is happening in the Middle East, but before that it was Ukraine, and there are so many other places where dialogue and understanding between different positions and different traditions and different cultures is so important. So I am really very honored and very happy in the name of the embassy to be part of this event. I would like to congratulate the Fundación and all the participants on the launching of the book. I'm very happy that it can be available for the readers in India. That's also one thing we are doing in the embassy, promoting Spanish works that can be published in India and are more easily accessible to the Indian public. So with the Opera Omnia here and the award, we really hope that Raimon Panikkar's works and thoughts and example will be more present in India, and we will see. No, I don't know when is this award going to be done. The award. So thank you very much.
As you mentioned, you promote culture. Here is a project ready for you. It's a project Vivarium Raimon Panikkar, lasting till 2031, and they say what we have been doing for you or for ambassador of Spain, and also the project Raimon Prize Asian edition, as I mentioned before. We had it last year for an international Raimon Panikkar Prize, but there were no applicants from Asia. And so I give it to you, and also in officially in your hands.
Thank you very much, Matilda. Yes. Thank you.
So, yeah, you will be closing, but one last speaker, we like Motilal Banarsidass, who want to speak here from the publisher. Please come and give a vote of thanks to this session. Thanks very much.
Good evening, everybody. And on behalf of our publishing house, I would like to thank the respected speakers who spoke so well. Well, I am not a scholar, so I do not know anything. But the only redeeming part is, which people may be surprised, I have met Panikkar ji because he needs no introduction. My late brother, when he met him, and I was so small, not even in the business, then I met. And more than a dozen titles have been published by us, which originally was published by the West. And the best part is, when everybody spoke about Vedic experience, which was also published by us. And it is available. And thanks to Milena, who made a platform for our publishing house to could speak like this. And people know me so well, but I would say that I am not known because of the scholars I am known. If the scholars were not there, I wouldn't have been there anyway. So thank you everybody, everyone, and God bless them. You also put it.
Yes. Okay. Together. Okay.
Thank you.